Qlik Dork back again, and today, my friends, we're finally going to dive into what I've been alluding to in most of my last several posts. The fact that we can store to Parquet files to use both internally or externally, just to show that the file format of the QVD doesn't really matter. What matters is why we're using them, the benefits that you get from using a stored format, and to prove that we're more than happy to share all the intellectual property that you might put into your applications to something else so that you can utilize that information for reporting or other ways that you may have to do. So let me acclimate you to the system. I've got on the left side of the screen here a store data, and so this application, I'm going to build the data, store it. In this application, I'm going to go off and read it. Now notice that I have no data here. So in this particular application, there's nothing there yet. So I'm going to go through this and walk through here. What I do is I've got my tables, I've got patients, I've got encounters, I've got 4 different patients, and I've got these 5 encounters. Notice that patients 3 and 4 here, my Dan the Wizard and Levi the Man Turner, have no encounters. They're perfectly healthy dudes. Those guys are like supermen to me. And as I shared when I talked to you about metadata, our AI engine interpreted their cognitive wisdom as being 999 years old. Hence, the reason that we had to be talking about metadata. I had to have that information to know I could trust that field value and know that's not the same as the human's physical age that they might tell us from their driver's license or something like that. Now, what we did, I had walked through how you could set up comments individually or how you could create these maps. And you just did a mapping load. And so then I did the mapping load for the fields. And then I could say, hey, comment the fields, comment the tables using the table map, comment the fields using the field map, comment the tags for fields using the tag map, and then when I store the information into the file, that metadata travels with those QVDs. So if I look at my data model viewer in my storing app, I can see, hey, look, I've got my table comments here. I keep that, and I've also got my field comments as well as my tags. So just wanted to show you that to you. Wanted to show you the screen of what it should look like, because what we're going to do when we do the reads after each step, I want to verify, hey, this looks the same, this looks the same, this is what I have. And so we knew that encounter 103 was for a patient that does not exist, a patient number 5. And we know that Dan and Levi have no encounters, so there's no arrival and discharge dates. Well, I haven't loaded the data yet, but I think you probably already get this. I simply go look at my data file. In this case, I'm using an internal space and loading these QVDs. So I'm going to go load these things, and I should see those rows of data. 4 patients, 5 encounters. Yay, good so far. And I'm going to look at my data model viewer. Hey, and guess what? That metadata has traveled with the QVD files, and I've got field level metadata as well, so I know that's their cognitive wisdom, not their physical wisdom. If I visualize that on the screen, hey, guess what? I get that same basic information. You know that. That's how QVDs work. Well, now what we're going to do is we're going to change a little bit here. Instead of going to QVD, I'm going to change this so that I go to Parquet. Same data, 4 patients, 5 encounters, table maps, comment maps, field tag maps. I map the data. And in this case, I'm saying we will never, ever continue to use this in QVDs. I'm going to apply this intellectual protocol to the Parquet format. And from here forward, I'm going to use Parquet. And you'll see here, I'm doing this on my internal library. This is in the Dalton space. I'm going to Dalton's data files. And the file instead is going to be patients.parquet and encounters.parquet using the Parquet format instead of the QVD format. So I go off and run that. Now, as you would expect, I've stored the data in Parquet. That does nothing with my data model. in the storing application, woohoo, I still have all of that luscious metadata. Well, let's go over here and change this in my loading app, and I'm going to move this down, and I'm going to say, hey, I want to read from Parquet. Now, all I've done here is said, hey, I'm not reading patients.qvd and encounters.qvd. I'm reading it from Parquet. Exactly the same. It's just the file. Because again, the format doesn't really matter to me. I'm going to go ahead and load this data. And woohoo, 4 rows of patients, 5 encounters. And if I look down at my preview, I can see that exact same data. If I look at my data model viewer here, I see my information and oh, snap. Houston, we got a problem. We've lost all that beautiful metadata. I now have the data from my Parquet format, but Parquet is more of a text type format and it doesn't retain that beautiful metadata. So if you're using files internally, you probably want to retain that QVD format, because if you go to Parquet, you're going to lose that metadata. That doesn't change the fact that you still get all the same thing. Your visuals are going to be the same. We do not care if we're reading from QVDs or from Parquet, and I don't really care what I store to. Well, now I know what some of you end up wanting to say. Hey, that data may need to go externally. I don't want to keep my Parquet files within Qlik's cloud. I want those to be out in an S3 bucket somewhere. Well, fantastic. In this version, I've still got my same 4 patients, my same 5 encounters. I got my same mapping. Yay, 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 yay. Map it. Now I store the patients into QVDs and encounters so that if I'm using it internally, I do get to retain that metadata, but I want to go externally now to an Amazon S3 bucket where that data is going to be stored because somebody externally is going to use it. So I'm going to go ahead and tell this guy to go run this guy. Yay, 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 yay. Everything here within my QVD is going to look identical. Right out, and there's nothing changing in this calling app based on what I store to, but it's my loading app that's going to change. And so I'm going to move this down, and I'm going to do this where I read externally. Oh no, there's nothing there. Well, I wanted to prove to you that it really is external. So I've got my Amazon S3 connection here. And if I were to show you what this guy is, you'll see I'm pointing out to here. Here's a bucket name. You're just not going to get my credentials for it, so get over that. Now, what I can do here is I can go look for that. Ooh, man, I want that patients.parquet file. That looks interesting. And ooh, guess what? I got my 4 rows of data. Wow, that was fantastic. That's easy enough. Hey, I want my encounters.parquet file. Easy enough. And honestly, there's really no difference here than had I loaded this from a local file. All right, but I wanted you to see that I wasn't pulling something, a fast one on you and just calling it S3. I wanted you to know it really was truly pointing to an S3 bucket. And if I go load this data, I'm going to load it, and hey, I get my 4 rows of data, my 5 encounters. If I go to the data model, I can see my data. I've got my 4 rows, my 5 rows, and I still don't got my metadata. Oh, that's right. Yeah. Whether it's internal or external, Parquet does not store your metadata. Well, I don't like that because I read all ClickDork's blogs, as you should have, and found out that metadata was super important, right? Why wouldn't I want to share this? And so I'm going to walk you through here. We're going to do the same thing, but we're going to do something slightly different with that metadata. Same 4 patients, same 5 encounters. Now, in these others, there was a mapping table. I did a mapping for table comments, a mapping for field comments, a mapping for tags. What I've done here is I've bundled all that together as health metadata. I've created a real physical table of that health data. And I've put all my table comments in there, all my fields, the field comments, and the field tags. Now, one thing that I have to do here is where I had the field for patient ID, I put that into both tables. Don't do anything. Notice I've got patient ID in both tables. But when I go load the map, I'm only going to load the distinct field name. So I'm going to only load it one time. But you'll see what happens on the other end when we read this table. So now I've got a physical table. I'm simply going to create mapping load statements. So one extra step above what we did before. And now I can still comment everything. And so that I could still store the comments into QVDs. But now notice what I'm going to do here. I'm going to do something different, which is what I alluded to in my previous video. I can store the whole data model into a Parquet file. I don't have to store table by table. The QVD files were Qlik Virtual Data Warehouse tables, whereas Parquet could be my virtual mart. And so I'm saying store patients and encounters here into one Parquet file, which was different than the other. And then you know what I'm saying? Gosh, there's no reason that I can't share the metadata. Now, I can't include the metadata up here because when you store to Parquet, it's one star schema. And my health metadata data is an external table. That's like a data island that doesn't talk to my patients or encounters in any way. And I store that into another file. The last thing I do here, and I don't think I showed, the comment probably showed, I didn't talk about it. I want to drop that health metadata table. I don't want that table around anymore. I just needed it to be able to be stored and then to go do the mapping. So now I'm going to load this. And we get our 4 rows of patients, our 5 encounters, and I get my 9 rows of field tags and metadata. All right. Notice here that it says now storing patient table, and it actually tells me I stored both those tables at one time. And then it shows me that I'm storing my health metadata file. Ooh, you're ready for me to press over here because you want to see what this is going to look like, don't you? Well, of course you do. So I'm going to bring this one up above the comments instead, and you'll see here, all I do is I'm reading this patients from my S3 bucket, and I'm reading my Parquet from my encounters from the S3 bucket, and gosh, I'll bet you'd really rather see how that's done. So let's get rid of that for a second. I'm going to go to that S3 bucket, and I'm going to pick Health Mart. Right now, imagine how much easier this is for your end users if you did have like a separate subdirectory that said Mart, and I was able to say, oh yeah, I'm looking for the health data. This is just what our data product does, combines everything together, and you say, yeah, I want the health Mart. Now go do something with it. So I'm going to say I want the health Mart Parquet. And I get it. And notice here it says Health Mart, and it says Patient ID and Encounter. Now, what you'll see in here is that the patients were called Health Mart because that was the name of the file. So the default thing goes in there, and the patients, the encounters themselves, are then in a different table that's actually called Patient ID Encounters. Notice here that it's created this synthetic field. That was not part of our information. It has added that for me, just like what happens with real data marts, where it's got to create synthetic keys for things. So I'm going to go ahead and say I want both of those tables. Now I'll come back here. I'm going to put my patient's table name in there because I do love to be neat and tidy. I'm going to spell that correctly. because otherwise it would bother me. And so I'm reading this. It's the same file, but notice there's just different table names, almost like reading from Excel, where the fact table would be the first sheet, and then I got a whole bunch of dimensions as the rest of my sheets. That would go on and on and on for any dimensions you have for as big as your star or snowflake schema may be. Now, you can understand how we would read that data, but now what I want to go ahead and do is read that health metadata again. I'm just reading that like I would any other data. I just happen to name it health metadata. It could have been called anything. I read those fields in. Now, I do exactly the same that I did over here. This is literally copied. I've got my comments. Now go read from my health metadata table and then go do the tagging. And so this code is literally copied. Could that be a QVS script that you include into both of these? Oh, well, I think that very well might be. Could the metadata itself be a QVS script that you might include into both? Well, that certainly might be, right? However you do that, doesn't matter to me. And then again, I'm going to drop that health metadata table, so I don't want it in my model. So let me go load this. And I read my 4 rows of patients and 6 rows of encounters. There are supposed to be 5 rows of encounters. We're going to have to investigate that. And then I've got my 9 rows of metadata. And now if I come to my data model, you'll see that I do not have patient ID here. That is not the link anymore. It is the synthetic key that was created to link these two for Parquet. But you'll see, I've got the table metadata and I've got the field metadata. In the encounters table, you'll see there was 6 rows because what it did was created the link for the patients that did not have IDs, because there was 4 actual encounters, and then it actually created that link. And because it's now using a synthetic key, there actually is a row for it physically, versus we just assumed there was nothing there before based on the way the Qlik Associative Engine works. And most wonderfully, now I've stored my entire mart to Parquet. Externally, this could be on a different tenant somewhere reading this. This could be some completely other system. But you have done those people a favor in the fact that you've given them that metadata externally as well. Any types of things you do that are open source, like with GitHub, you end up seeing a .readme or a .md file, and people are used to that. If you define a policy for what you're going to name that metadata file, and it's going to be either called metadata or MD or readme, however you want to do it, give it a consistent naming as a best practice so that you would always get used to assuming, hey, if I load this data file, I'm going to see the metadata file right by it, and I need to load that as well and do something with it. Again, if you want to make life easy, make them QVS scripts if that's what you want to do to go parse those things out, because there's no reason I couldn't change my metadata table name here to be anything I want. But this is the important part, and this is the important part, as I showed you in my importance of metadata video. Before I go, I do want to make a shout out to Vishal Gupta. In my previous video, I showed an image of Parquet files, and I said, oh yeah, store it to Parquet if you want. What I forgot to say completely was that I could do these externally, and I really had hoped to make that point. So, Vishal, thank you for prompting me on that stuff. I love getting comments because I am getting old. My old age isn't cognitive. I'm just getting old. So unlike Dan and Levi that have a cognitive 999, I just feel like I'm 999 sometimes. I hope that everybody's enjoyed this. I hope you've learned something from this. I'll make sure that the code is available up on my blog that you could download for these things just to play with it and try it. And as always, I sure hope you have a great, great day.